Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time you happen to be watching this, I hope you're having a wonderful week. As I wrap up class, these are the 10 class takeaways that I have. I went into class with a set of expectations. Some of them were met. Some of the goals I had were met. I think most of them were, but there were certain things that stuck out to me. Some of them were things that I wish I would have done a little differently. Some of them were things that surprised me rereading the books, going through them a second, third time. You'll notice the asterisks. I put the creators section of this presentation as one takeaway. You can easily argue that there are 11 class takeaways. As always, all the borrowed images and the quoted text are used for educational purposes. I'm not trying to make a buck, I'm just trying to hold a class. First of all, being confused is part of the fun. If you've never read a book before, I can see where it'd be confusing. And here at the end, I think it's still confusing. Try having this conversation with somebody, explaining that there was a race created by space alien gods, and that this race was supposed to protect the Earth, and that the headquarters of Earth's mightiest heroes is the body of a deceased celestial. And by the way, you've got all of these things about correcting excessive deviation, and you've got people who can resurrect themselves, and you're going to be trying to destroy them because they are resurrecting themselves, which also leads to the question, if they can resurrect themselves, how do you destroy them? And we've got secret abductions of mutant geneticists from a mutant island nation. I don't think anybody listening to you, at least any sane person who's not a comic geek listening to you, is going to think that any of that makes sense. But being confused and fighting your way through the confusion, as I said in the intro presentation, is part of the fun. I hope you had fun. The art matters. I'm calling it sequential art on this slide, and I realize there's a certain irony because I'm using a splash page, not sequential art, but the art matters. Whether it's that stark, beautiful art in this week's Black Panther, whether it's a splash page like this one, whether it's any of the other pieces of art we talked about, or the art that you're going to have an option to write an essay about this week, the art matters. And it's something I think in a regular class where we have weekly assignment or daily assignments on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, I could have done a little bit more with than in the situation we have here. I think it's important to understand that these stories aren't going to end. Somebody is going to pick up this series of panels. Somebody is going to have Ajax judging. Somehow, way or another, we're going to learn whether that thumb is going to go up or whether that thumb is going to go down, whether somebody is going to manipulate her into turning that thumb down. We are going to have a repeat of this someplace down the line. It might not be a big crossover. It might be just in an Eternals book or an Avengers book, but we're going to see this again. The stories don't end. And even if this isn't the greatest cliffhanger in the world, it's still a bit of a cliffhanger. Comics are political. They always have been. We talked about Frederick Wortham. We talked about Kefauver and his hearings. We talked about the Katzenjammer kids having their names changed to the Shenanigan kids because the German name during World War I was problematic. We talked about Coates as a public intellectual, and we talked about Coates using the superhero genre to deal with democracy and to deal with other elements of the political nature of the world. I don't think he's talking about Wakanda here. With the sentence, Wakanda has all the intelligence any advanced society would want and none of the wisdom that any free society needs. I don't think he's talking about Wakanda. I think he's talking about a nation a lot closer to home. And I think the Queen when she says we never studied a single nation founded on truth and candor, she's not talking about Wakanda either. Comics have been a political football. Comics have been used to promote politics one way or another. And I think it's important to understand that. And it's important to read it. And if you disagree with it, great. If you agree with it, great. But it's going to have politics in it. And it's almost impossible to have a comic or to have any literature be non political. I didn't do a lot with the authors, but I do think there are famous and forgotten creators. Stan Lee, Jack Kirby at the top, Marston on the bottom left, the creator of Wonder Woman, Coates, who is famous as a public intellectual, and in the middle, African Americans like Middleton and Jackson that nobody's really ever heard of, but who were great artists, great creators of comic book art prior to the time when African American creators would have been accepted broadly in the industry. I think I should have done a little more with women writers. And I'm going to use Gail Simone as an example. Gail Simone is a great comic book writer. I've enjoyed her runs on various books. The recent Variants run, that little miniseries, was awesome. She was also a blogger, and she created this discussion of a trope that she called women in refrigerators, where female characters existed merely to be threats that merely to be threatened by the bad guy so that the hero would have something to worry about. And ever so often, the woman got stuck in a refrigerator, or the corpse of the character got stuck in the refrigerator. Here we have Barbara Gordon, who is Batgirl, and here we have her using the term fridged. They fridged me to get to you. That term fridged was a trope that got used by a lot of fans to describe what was happening, to describe how the female character was just being used as a target so that the supervillain could destroy the main character who happened to be male, in this case Nightwing. But the influence of that on the comic book themselves and on the fact that they're going to use her term, fridged, as an, as a recognition of what's happening. And I think it's important that in this case, Barbara Gordon, the book The Killing Joke, she is tortured so that her father is forced to watch. It's these sorts of things that I think are an important element of female writers coming to the story in a different way than male writers might. The quests for mythology. Yes, this is the bad guy. Yes, this is the villain of the piece. But he's still got a quest. The search for knowledge never ends. The search for knowledge should be enough. And remember, in the quests, people can refuse the call forever. And the quest to become a better person, the quest to use that knowledge, seems to be a call that he's refused. Also, the mystical and the pedagogical. There's this question about why it feels better to nurture life than to destroy it. And understanding that because that's the case, Ivy, threatening to exterminate the human race, she got carried away. It is better to nurture life than it is to destroy it. That recognition turns her around. That epiphany turns her around. I think it's a mystical recognition. The idea of change, the ability to change, I think is an important part of the Judgment Day run. And I think she's, it's perhaps a little bit preachy, but it fulfills a pedagogical function. And nurture and destroying life, or the fact that all life should be nurtured, I think meets the mystical function as well. Obviously, we spent a lot of time practicing philosophy and theology without a license. All the talk of gods, all the talk of philosophy throughout this book. And if you look at the quotation here, the idea of humans being condemned for not being divine when we're all sort of mediocre, we're all sort of average. Condemning us for being divine might be a step too far. Once again, I think there's a social science thing here, the use of the term exceptional, and American exceptionalism, I think, is part of the story here. But comics, I think, allow for the practice of philosophy and theology without a license. They allow people to think deeply. I think this is an important element that often gets overlooked as we're trying to create them as kids' books, excuse me. And I think it's also important here to take a look at, they may not do it deeply, but they're doing it. And if they urge you as a reader or me as a reader to dig a little deeper, then I think they've done their job. Finally, we talked about this idea that everyone can find a hero or a story. I hope some of the, female members of the class were able to identify with Mary, able to identify with Wonder Woman, able to identify with Elektra, whomever. I think the idea that if someone who's as big a mess as I am can still be a hero despite all of their fecal matter, you can be too. Again, I think that that's an important thing. You can get past your fecal matter. Tony Stark got past his. We can get past ours. And finally, this class was an overview. The shadow knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men deep down in the depths. And I'm not sure that I dug deep enough all the time. I hope you as readers were able to dig deep, but there's a lot more digging to do. And I hope some of you pick up a comic book ever so often and try to dig a little deeper. And even if you don't dig deep, I hope you pick up a comic and enjoy it. Thank you very much for this class. I hope you got something to take out of it. And finally, to switch things up, you're not going to have to do a daily writing. I gave 10 takeaways. Just give me your 3 down here on the bottom. That's going to be your daily writing. Everybody have a good one.